Breaking tonight, President Trump's attorney, Rudy Giuliani, with some explosive allegations regarding the Michael Cohen tapes. Hello and welcome to Justice. I'm Jeanine Pirro. Thanks for being with us tonight. And thank you for once again making Justice the #1 rated show on all of cable news all last weekend. My opening statement in a moment, but first, Rudy Giuliani, within the hour, has told Fox News that experts have gone over the tape that former Trump attorney Michael Cohen allegedly made of conversations with the president. And Giuliani says, quote, somebody played around, close quote, with the tape. And he says the Trump legal team is still trying to get to the bottom of it. Among other things, Giuliani said he is trying to get access to the original full recording. A prospect Giuliani concedes is slim. And joining me now by phone on all of this breaking news is the man himself, President Trump's attorney, Mr. Mayor Rudy Giuliani. All right, good evening, Mr. Mayor. Thank you so much for being with us this evening. Some shocking news tonight.
I guess, Judge, that we have to stop being shocked. I have to admit that I was. I always thought of Michael Cohen as a responsible guy, a guy who was basically honest and certainly was extremely loyal to the president, as the president was to him for many, many years. I used to hear rumors about him, about his character and some of the things he did. And now I find he does things like records his client, doesn't tell him. He abruptly ended that recording as soon as the president said the word check. What we're investigating is how did that happen? What actually did happen? What was eliminated? And then you've got to raise that question with every one of these tapes. How many of them did he play around with? I mean, the guy has like 180 tapes.
Well,
and Lanny Davis, his lawyer, said he didn't intend to deceive. Well, I don't know who's a bigger liar. I mean, Lanny Davis has to confront the fact that with Chris Cuomo, he took his phone and he put it in the desk drawer and said, I'm not going to record it. What do you mean you're not intending to deceive?
Well,
I don't know. These Clinton people, think they can just say something. He didn't intend to deceive, and we got him on tape putting it in the drawer.
Well, you know, Mr. President, Mr. Mayor, you and I both know you're a former prosecutor. I'm a former prosecutor. You've got to lay a foundation for the admissibility of any tape. And what struck me the first time I heard the tape, and we'll get to how CNN got it in a moment, was you have to, number one, make sure that it's admissible in evidence if it's recorded with the permission of one of the parties. And it was, because Michael Cohen recorded it. It was unethical because he's the lawyer, but that's another issue. Then we have to lay a proper foundation. Anyone listening to that tape knows that all of a sudden it's cut off, it's garbled at a crucial period of time when the president seems to be saying, no, you make a check out. We don't use cash.
Yes.
And nobody asked any questions about it. You and I both know they cannot tamper with this. But the only way for us to figure out if this is accurate is for you to get the original tape. How are you going to do that?
Well, we've got to hope it exists. This could be a recording of a recording. We're not sure yet. That they can probably determine. I mean, you're right. We may never be able to determine that, but we have determined the fact that he tampered with the tape in the sense that he abruptly, mid-conversation, turned it off. Now, we know he didn't do that for a good reason, because a guy that goes into a reporter and hides his thing and says, I'm not taping it, and then is taping it for 2 hours, is definitely not someone who didn't intend to deceive, as Lanny Davis falsely said.
Well, in addition to that, he's lying, but that's another issue. You and I both know that in order for the government to admit something into court, they've got to show its continuing custody and that no changes, additions, or deletions have been made. If they cannot prove that there are no deletions or changes, and we don't know where it's been, could that be the reason that it was leaked to CNN? And do you have any idea how it got to CNN?
Well, isn't that interesting? Because last week at this time, Jay Sekulow and I were being accused of leaking it. Maggie Haberman, who got the story, to her credit, made it clear that it didn't come from us. There's only one other place it could come from, Cohen and Lanny Davis. And people wondered, well, why did they put it out? Because it's harmful to Cohen. I think they put it out because they wanted the doctored version to obscure whatever else might be on that tape, which will be I'm sure it'll be good for us. That, I think, is lost to us. It was never recorded in the first place. I was hoping he had possibly erased it and we could maybe recover it, but it was never recorded in the first place.
Well, Mr. Mayor, everybody knows you can't tamper with stuff.
As you know, Judge, we can draw an inference from that it was favorable to us because of the way in which he was deceiving us.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Rudy Giuliani, I want to thank you for calling in with this breaking...
Great book, Judge.
Thank you.
I've gotten through half of it now. You gave me a copy.
Thank you.
Got through half of it. And I bought my own to give about 3 or 4 of them out. Great book.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Right.
And I know you're going to have more to say tomorrow morning on Fox News Sunday.
I'll be on Chris Wallace tomorrow.
All right. And now to my opening statement. Americans elected the outsider businessman president. Why? To borrow a phrase from the man himself, what do we have to lose? The economy was in the tank. Our kids were living in the basement because they couldn't find a job. Factories were closing down. Jobs in manufacturing were being shipped overseas. And in trade, China was sucking us dry. The Obama folks called it a healthy economy, but there was barely a pulse. 1% annual GDP growth was the new normal for these bozos. And President Obama even warned that Donald Trump's election would result in economic disaster for all Americans.
Because some of those jobs of the past are just not going to come back. And when somebody says, like the person you just mentioned, who I'm not going to advertise for, that he's going to bring all these jobs back. Well, how exactly are you going to do that? What are you going to do? There's no answer to it. He just says, well, I'm going to negotiate a better deal. Well, how exactly are you going to negotiate that? What magic wand do you have? And usually the answer is he doesn't have an answer.
Because I want you to tell your friends, don't let a friend vote Trump. So here's the deal. He can't escape the math. Now, math can be kind of inconvenient if it doesn't add up the way you want it to. And economists, left, right, in the middle, all say the same thing. That Trump's policies would throw us into a recession, the last thing we need. He would undermine the growth that we've had since the Great Recession.
In the event Donald wins, I have no doubt in my mind the market tanks.
His tax plan, in combination with his refusal to reform entitlements and to honestly address spending, would balloon the deficit and the national debt. So even though Donald Trump has offered very few specific economic plans, what little he has said is enough to know that he would be very bad for American workers and for American families.
And then there was Paul Krugman, a Nobel Prize-winning economist, writing for the New York Times. Let me say that again. He's a Nobel Prize-winning economy, and here's what he said. The stock market will plummet and never recover from the election of Donald Trump. So we are very probably looking at a global recession with no end in sight. Some are so blinded by their hatred of Donald Trump that they forget decades of training in their own field. And as America surges forward with more jobs than people to fill them, with African American and Hispanic unemployment the lowest in history, with millions coming off of food stamps because they want to work, the left, well, they rant and protest and create chaos. They throw people out of restaurants and off television shows. They even go to church and say that God sent them to destroy Donald Trump. The left doesn't care about our economic success. All they want to do is make noise. But it's nothing more than background noise, white noise. The truth? Nobody's paying attention to them. Donald Trump's numbers continue to increase. His popularity just keeps going up. And after he met with Putin and was accused of everything from collusion to treason, an offense, by the way, punishable by death, his numbers continue to go up. When are they going to realize that their yelling and screaming is nothing but a distraction? Nobody cares. We care about food on the table, paying the rent, the mortgage, paying for kids' clothing for school. But no, they want to talk about whores and porn stars, or about a lawyer who they're squeezing so tight he'll confess to sinking the Titanic. And yet, despite a media focused on a whack-a-mole Trump-Russia collusion nonsense and the haters continuing to hate, the outsider president has thundered forward with his America First agenda. And with a kryptonite-proof aura of invincibility, the 45th outsider president, often working without the support of his own party, has produced a GDP that no one thought possible, 4.1%, and we are on track to hit the highest average growth rate in over 13 years. What do you got to say to that, Barack, Hillary, and all you geniuses? We're flying, folks. This is the America Donald Trump had in mind when he asked us, what do you have to lose? And that's my open. Tell me what you think on my Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Hashtag Judge Jeanine. And if you love my opens, you'll love my new book, Liars, Leakers, and Liberals, The Case Against the Anti-Trump Conspiracy. It's a New York Times #1 bestseller. So go out and get your copy if you haven't already. And if you have, I thank you. And here with reaction to my opening statement and much more, White House Deputy Press Secretary Hogan Gidley. All right, Hogan, talk to me about the economy and my open.
You're absolutely right, Judge. You remember when Donald Trump was elected to be president of the United States, so many people said this economy wouldn't just tank, but it would never recover from what he would do to this economy. And here we are now with 3.5 million jobs created, regulations cut, we're open for business. This president has gone on the global stage and says other countries now have to pay their fair share. When he did that in NATO, he went right to our friends and allies and said, folks, we're the piggy bank of this world. It stops today. That's also important. And listen, I was in Granite City, Illinois, with the president when he gave that speech to that steel plant, U.S. Steel. I watched the tears stream down the faces of grown men who looked at the president, who told me they hadn't had a job in 2 years because Barack Obama told them those types of jobs were gone and would never come back. 1.9% GDP growth, as you just said in the open, that was the quote-unquote new normal, the experts would say. Now we're hovering at 3%. This president has proved everyone wrong yet again. Americans are back to work. It's an incredible time in this country, and it's all due to this president's economic policies.
You know, I have to tell you, Hogan, it really touches my heart and every American that people who want to work, people who pay their taxes, who follow all the rules, they're the ones who deserve the effort of this government. But and speaking of that, I want to talk about the abolition of ICE. It seemed that the Democrats had pulled back on it because they were doing polls, and most of the American people, I mean, there's a huge number, are not in support of the abolition of ICE. Then, just a couple days ago, we've got Ocasio-Cortez, the socialist who beat Joe Crowley in New York for Congress, the primary, and now Kirsten Gillibrand. They're now saying we've got to abolish ICE. They're back to that song and dance. They're serious.
It's incredible. Anyone who wants to abolish ICE, these Democrats, either A, have no clue what ICE actually does, or B, have decided to ignore the safety and security of their own constituents. ICE are on the front lines for MS-13, the dangerous, bloodthirsty, brutal gang. They are the ones who protect commercial air travel. They focus on child smuggling, on human trafficking, drugs, all of those things. They're there to stop that. This president comes out and stands up for the hard-working men and women that put their lives on the line every day that work for ICE. And Democrats say, no, we're going to stand with MS-13, whose motto is kill, rape, and control. It is just crazy. Absolutely insane.
I want to get to one more thing because we're coming up against a break. The remains of American soldiers from the Korean War are now coming back. How many administrations before Donald Trump tried to get the remains of American soldiers?
There have been several, but this president actually delivered. Remember, the Democrats mocked and derided him for even talking to Kim Jong-un. They said these things that he promised would never come to fruition. And here we are on the precipice of getting the repatriated remains of those people in the military. I talked to some folks who served and their surviving loved ones, and they told me this gives them a sense of pride, a sense of peace, and closure that they never would have had but for this president. Tough negotiations, getting those remains back in this country.
You know,
it's amazing.
It is amazing, Hogan Gidley, and it's all about closures for these poor families. And kudos to the president. Thanks so much for being with us, Hogan.
Thank you, Judge.
All right, Dan Bongino, Chris Hahn standing by on the panel. But next, more in tonight's breaking news, as you heard exclusively from Rudy Giuliani right here. Next, Congressman Ron DeSantis weighs in on the Trump-Cohen tapes and the explosive new allegations from the president's attorney. Don't go away.
We've accomplished an economic turnaround of historic proportions. When I came into office, 1.5 million fewer prime-age Americans were working than 8 years before. But we've turned it all around. Once again, we are the economic envy of the entire world.
That's President Trump talking about the incredible news about the economy on Friday. And a lot to talk about with my panel tonight, so let's get right to it and see what they think. NRA TV contributor, former aide to Chuck Schumer, and radio show host Chris Hahn join me live. Back up a second. It's former NRA TV contributor Dan Bongino and Chris Hahn. All right, Chris, how are you going to wiggle your way out of what the president said? That 1.5 million fewer prime-age Americans were working than 8 years before when he came into office.
Well, look, I'll give him some credit for the economy, maybe not as much as he's giving himself. He didn't inherit a mess. The economy has been on an upward trajectory for the last 10 years. And I do give him some credit for it. I also give credit to the fact that a lot of people were front-loading their exports, worrying about a potential trade war. And we'll see what happens. Don't forget, President Obama had 4 quarters that were better than this. And he created more jobs in the last 18 months of his presidency than President Trump has created in the first 18 months of him. And we'll see where we wind up. Quarterly growth does not necessarily equal a great end-of-year number. Obama learned that in 2014, where he had a 5.1% growth in the second quarter and then over 4% growth in the third quarter. He lost seats in the midterms, and they were at 2.9% at the end of the year.
It's all about sustainability, Chris, and Obama couldn't do it. But Dan, what's your response to that?
Well, Chris is a little confused. President Trump did inherit a mess. The facts speak for themselves. Guys, this is a fact. I know Chris sometimes has a tough time with these things, but Barack Obama is the only president in United States history to never, in 2 terms, by the way, reach 3% GDP growth annually at any point in his presidency. Keep in mind, one-term presidents have done it. He's the only one ever. Cumulative GDP growth. He's also at the bottom. He's one of the top 5 worst economic presidents in American history. And by the way, because I know Chris is going to try to wiggle out of this one, he was wrong about the GDP numbers, Judge, on our debate 3 weeks ago. Barack Obama handed him a 1.9% growth rate in the final quarter and 1.6% the final year. Trump turned it around right away. He was wrong about it.
Did you call him up and tell him he was wrong, Dan?
I didn't want to bother him after the show. I thought he might be sleeping or having hot cocoa or something.
Go ahead, Chris.
I got to go get ice cream for my daughter after the show. But here's the deal. Here's the deal. My numbers are dead on for the second and third quarters of 2014.
So
and
you
what
admit
I'm saying
your errors.
is, let's not count our... No, hold on. Let's not count our 3% growth before it hatched. President Trump did not achieve that last year. He may not achieve it this year. 2.9% is almost 3%. Obama got 2.9%. I think President Trump's going to be between 2.9 and 3.1 this year. If he gets 3.1, I'll say hooray. But let's not count our chickens before they hatch, and let's not give all the credit to him. Obama did not leave him a mess. It was a booming economy. People were going back to work, and we've been on an upward trend for years.
Go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, well, listen, that's just not true, Chris. He handed him a mess by any measure. Now, listen, I'll agree with you. I'll give you this. I don't give any president good or bad credit for the economy. I give it to the American entrepreneur. I think the president can do things to get the government out of the way. And I think that's what Donald Trump has done through the tax cuts and cleaning up the regulatory mess Barack Obama left us. But Barack Obama, Chris, it was a disaster by just about any metric. You know, labor force participation, wage growth. And by the way, the liberal talking point, which I'm surprised you didn't bring up. Oh, well, wages aren't growing under Trump. That is not true.
That isn't
true. The Employment Cost Index, which is a proxy for it, Donald Trump, his first year, bested Barack Obama's 8 years. Okay. He has never reached those metrics on wage growth.
Wages.
Go ahead, Chris.
2.6.
There's a long way to go between here and the end. Look, there's a long way to go between here and the end.
Okay,
one thing we can say about President Obama
Guys, I have a sore throat. Hold on, Chris. I can't yell tonight. I have a sore throat. Listen, here's the bottom line. How many people, that I have a sore throat or I'm getting to the bottom line?
No, that you can't yell at me. I want you to feel
better. Here's the bottom line. Thank you. Here's the bottom line. My mother just called me during the break. She said to me, Jeanine, you have to have some water. If the unemployment is the lowest it's been ever for African Americans, for minorities, we've got more jobs than people to fill them. You know what? You can talk GDP till the cows come home. That's what matters. A job and the ability to take care of your family. But I want to move on now. I want to talk about this tape. Well, Chris, do you want to answer? Go ahead.
Well, no, look, there's a lot of good and there's also a lot of caution. The deficit and the debt are growing dramatically under this president, and that can lead to problems long term.
Go ahead, Dan.
No, that's the trade deficit. That's the trade deficit, not the budget deficit. Those are different things.
Go ahead, Dan.
I give up. All right, don't tell me on a Saturday night I had to shave for this, and you're gonna let him get away with it. Listen, for 8 years we had to deal with Barack Obama and record deficits. The media, the libs, Han probably celebrated. Oh, it's the greatest thing ever, debt and deficits. Now Donald, listen, I get it, Chris, I'm with you. Debt and deficits stink. Point stipulated, but please spare us the nonsense about debt and deficit after
Obama
8 years
reduced
of
the
Barack
deficit
Obama's
every year. After his last 6 years, he reduced the budget deficit every year.
Well, folks, this is the scam he's pulling. Chris always has a scam. He came in office with the highest annual deficit in American history. Chris, if I owe $700,000 and make $50,000 a year, and then I pay down $25,000, this is not an accomplishment. That's what Obama did. He ran historic deficits every single year.
Dan.
Stop pretending otherwise.
All right, guys. I can tell you what I think, Chris Hahn, Dan Bongino. Thank you. Now, how did a former attorney general make my list of the week's most outrageous statements? That's ahead. But next, more on the Trump-Cohen tapes. Alan Dershowitz joins me, and you don't want to miss him.
We are now, what we're investigating is how did that happen? What actually did happen? What was eliminated? And then you've got to raise that question with every one of these tapes. How many of them did he play around with? I mean,
Developing tonight, that was President Trump's attorney, Rudy Giuliani, minutes ago on Justice, discussing the breaking news on the Trump-Cohen tape. Joining me now with reaction, author of the new book, The Case Against Impeaching Trump. It's a great book, a great read. I bought it. I read it. Harvard Law Professor Emeritus Alan Dershowitz. Now, Professor, I always read your articles in The Hill. And yesterday you wrote a very interesting piece on how an obstruction case against President Trump should raise a flag for any civil libertarians out there, irrespective of which side of the aisle they're on. Tell me why.
Well, what they're trying to do is stitch together an obstruction case based on public tweets on the exercise of First Amendment rights. You know, people don't obstruct justice in public. If you're going to obstruct justice, you're going to do it in private. The idea that the special counsel is trying to put together a case, he knows he doesn't have a case. There's no smoking gun. He's trying to put together a case based on tweets, public statements, presidential actions. That is so dangerous to civil liberties. Today it's being used against Trump. Tomorrow it'll be used against Democrats. And the day after tomorrow it could be used against any of you in the audience. Every civil libertarian ought to be outraged at the idea that special counsel, if this report is true, is trying to cobble together a case against President Trump based on his tweets and his public statement.
Professor, would you also agree that when some of the judges were looking at the travel ban, they were looking outside the four corners of the ban itself to other things that the president may have said or not said? This is fundamental contract law. Everything is within the four corners of a contract or based on what is relevant to the specific issue. Would you agree with that? Because if you don't, tell me.
No, I completely agree. The Supreme Court, yes, in a 5-4 decision, but nonetheless, a majority of the Supreme Court said what the president said about the travel ban is not as important as what's in the words of the travel ban. You can't have a travel ban that would be constitutional if President Obama issued it, but the same words would be unconstitutional if President Trump issued it.
All right.
You have to look at the words of the travel ban.
We agree. We agree. I want to talk about Rudy Giuliani, who was just on with breaking news, and he talks about the tape, that there's a break in the tape. It gets muddled, and the first thing I thought was, what's going on with this? What are your thoughts on it?
Well, about 10 years ago, I represented the former president of the Ukraine, who was charged with a serious crime. I went over to Kiev, and it was based on a tape. And we were able to get the tape and put it through all kinds of forensic analysis and prove that they switched words from the tape and made him say things that he didn't say. I don't know that that's happened here. All I know is this tape must be subjected to forensic analysis. We must stretch the words to find out what exactly the president said, what the context was, and most important, why it ended at a particular point. Was that a decision made by Mr. Cohen to end it there? Was it erased because he said things that were exculpatory? We need to know the entire context of the tape if the tape means anything. By the way, the tape does not contain any evidence of crime. How do I know that? A former judge appointed by Judge Kimball Wood made a determination that this tape is covered by the lawyer-client privilege, and criminal discussions are not covered by the lawyer-client privilege. So we already have a judicial determination that this tape does not contain elements of a crime.
So, Professor, you're talking about, I assume, Barbara Jones, the master on this, who would not have handed over the tape if it were covered, if it were not covered by attorney-client privilege.
Absolutely right. And nobody has made that point. And it's very important. You already have a judicial determination that it's covered. If it's covered, it's not criminal.
It's not a crime. Go ahead, Professor.
No, it's not a crime to seek advice from your lawyer as to how to deal with a complicated situation. We've every lawyer has had conversations like this with clients. In the end, the clients listen to you.
And that's
but nobody should have heard this tape, and we have to find out who leaked it.
Okay, I agree. And that's why you're a Harvard professor, because you're so smart, Alan Dershowitz.
Well,
thanks for being with us. And she loves those outrageous statements. Candace Owens from Turning Point USA, standing by live to run down the craziest things that were said this week. It's next. You don't want to miss it.